Okay, today is May 3rd, 2019. Springtime, obviously, and the grass is growing already, and it already needs a trim out front for sure. So I just want to do a quick video on this MTD big box store mower. I don't know, these are like 159 bucks or something like that. They're pretty common. You know, again, it's made by MTD, 125cc. They're good, cheap little push mowers. This one here is about as basic as you can get. There's really no adjustments on the wheels or anything, but I like them like that. I don't like the baggers and more stuff to go wrong. This thing just usually plugs right along, but it sat all winter, and to be honest with you, I didn't perform a maintenance on it last year, so now it doesn't want to start. Look at that beauty there. Mice try to chew through there. I actually ended the season last year. I had to get one more mowing, and I stuck a piece of wood in there because the gas was flying all over the place. So I might have an old one of those kicking around somewhere. I got to replace that. But I just wanted to do a quick video on how to do the maintenance on this to get this thing running. I pulled it quite a few times and put a little bit of starter fluid in it, and spit and sputtered a little bit, but it doesn't want to run. So it needs a full maintenance. And I'm also going to take the carburetor off and clean the carburetor out. I'll put a new plug in it and a new air filter. But how you do that, pretty simple here. This is the air filter. Just pull up on this. That comes off. You can see the air filter, like I said. I did not obviously do a maintenance last year, so we're going to get a new one, or I'm going to clean this. Doesn't look like the mice got to it, so maybe I'll clean it. We'll see. I got to go get a new plug anyway, so I'll probably just pick one up. So basically, to get this carburetor off, you have 4 screws. 2 of them are 8mm and 2 are 7mm. You got the 2 7s down here. You got an 8 here up above the fuel push, and you got one to the left over here. That's your other 8mm. So take those 4 off, and that'll get you access to the carburetor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, I got the cover taken off. There's your 2 7mm head screws and your 2 8mm head screws, and then this thing just pops off. So this is what you end up with. You got your carburetor here. So basically, to get this carburetor off, it's actually pretty simple. You know, you might think you have to unbolt it or something, but you actually don't. Just grab a hold of it and yank on it, and it's kind of got a, hopefully you're seeing that. There we go. It's kind of got a quick connect, I guess I would call it, and that pulls right off. So at this point, you got your fuel line, and I'm going to use a pair of needle nose vice grips. Any kind of pinch clamp will work. But if you have any fuel in the tank, you don't want to get that all over the place, and you don't want to waste your gas for that matter. So pinch that off, and you should be good to go. So now, lastly, well, I shouldn't say lastly, we got a couple more things to do here. You have to get that pitch clamp off and separate it from the fuel line, and then you have your cable right there that hooks to the top of the carburetor. And see if this will focus a little bit better. This will pull right out of that hole. Okay, I'm going to try to do this one-handed. Basically, to get this pinch clamp off, just get yourself a pair of pliers, you know, needle nose or something, maybe with a little bit wider end to it. I'm going to use these needle nose that I have because I got the curve on it, but if you don't have a pair of these, any kind of pliers should work. But yeah, so basically get in there, whatever pliers you find. These were close by, so I grabbed these. Pinch it and slide it back enough where it's getting off the, I'll call it the shaft of the inlet going into the carburetor. And that should allow us to pull that hose off now. Okay, now that hose is off of there, you know, again, make sure you pinch it off, so if not, you would have fuel spilling all over the place right now. But now this carburetor is pretty much free. The only thing you got left is the rod, the linkage rod. So get this to focus. With the carburetor, with everything disconnected, you should be able to finagle it, and that'll pop right off. Okay, so we have our carb off now, and there's nothing special about this carb. It's pretty cheap. It's all plastic. But on the bottom you have 2 more 7mm head bolts, and we're going to remove those, and that'll get us access to the float, and we can get things cleaned up. I will mention that these are pretty cheap. If you go on eBay or maybe even Amazon, I've gotten them off of eBay before. They're about 22 bucks for one of these, brand new, so it's almost worth it just to order a new one. I want to get my grass done, so I don't want to wait the 4 or 5 days to get it, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. And truthfully, if you can clean it up, why waste 22 bucks? So I got the bottom piece off, and if you can see that, I had this in a shed, but it's one of those, I call them paper sheds. They're ones you get from Home Depot. You put together for about 300 bucks. So obviously they leak, and you can see that this full of water. So that's half my problem. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this apart to clean it. That's the float, plastic float, and that pin right there. We're going to pull this pin out. There's nothing holding it in. There's no C-clip or E-clip or anything like that. Just take your pliers and that'll pull right out. We're going to get the float out, and then we'll start cleaning it. Okay, so once you slide your pin out, you can get this float out. Like I said, there's nothing really that holds that pin in. It just grab it, usually slides right out. And then that's your float. Make sure that this isn't cracked or filled with water. This one's fine, but these are pretty chintzy. So after a while, sometimes they get, it depends on how much water gets in there. Sometimes it finds a way in there. So now once you got that off, there really isn't too much serviceable on this carburetor. Again, I don't want to call it a throwaway carburetor, but more or less a throwaway carburetor. But now that we got the float out, I'm going to put some, get this to focus, I'm going to send some carburetor and choke cleaner through all the passages. I don't want to dig too deep into this because everything's plastic, and you start trying to take plastic pieces off of this and things are going to break. So at this point I'm going to send some carburetor and choke cleaner through it, and we'll reassemble it. Make sure you wear eye protection when you're doing this for obvious reasons. That stuff squirts right back at you. And make sure you pull this guy off here and squirt some cleaner in there as well. This just pulls right out. I'll try to do it one-handed here. That's it. It just pulls out. So now just take your cleaner and spray in there. I think I forgot to mention the float valve or needle valve. That's in the bottom of the float. You can see that slot right there, and that will slide right into that. So just take a quick look at that. This one doesn't look bad. Sometimes they could be worn and you can't tell. That doesn't look like it's going to focus. But unless it's a real old lawnmower, that's probably going to be in halfway decent shape. But take a quick look at it. And again, that slides right into that sleeve. And now you can reassemble this, which I'm going to do off camera. And then from there, I'm going to go to the hardware store. I'm going to get a new plug, a new filter. We're going to put this carburetor back on, and we're going to see if it fires up. Alright, we're going to go ahead and remove the spark plug now. And I'm making this video really for the homeowner. who wants to try to perform their own maintenance on their lawnmower, you know, or if they're having a problem starting like I did. And it is pretty simple. So, you know, people that work on motors all the time, this is probably a real basic video. But again, if you're a homeowner and you don't want to go out and pay somebody $80 to do a maintenance on a $150 lawnmower, this will definitely help you out. So to get this spark plug out, you got your boot on here. Let's give that a yank. Sometimes they're on there good. Alright, so she popped off now. This one here, I believe, happens to be 5/8. You need a 5/8 socket, or I have one of these tools. This is like a lawnmower tool. I've had this for a while now. I think that's the 5/8 end. That might be 11/16. And that's like to remove the oil plug if you're going to change the oil. So you can pick these up for like $10. In fact, they even have a cheaper version you can get. It doesn't have the square part on it, and it's got a rod that goes through it. I think you can pick them up for like, you know, $4 or $5 or something. So it's not a big investment. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Basically, slide that in there. Hopefully, you have enough room. I think I just caught that. So I'm going to go off camera for a minute, but basically counterclockwise, lefty loosey, righty tighty. Alright, so there's your plug. I believe this is a 12YC. Yeah, I think that's a 12YC. It's a little cruddy. But take this with you to the hardware store or your big box store. If you have a local hardware store, you're better off bringing it to them. Those guys are usually a little more knowledgeable. You know, they'll match this up for you. So, looks like I'm ready for a trip to the hardware store. Okay, back from the hardware store. Got ourselves a new air filter and a new plug. I believe the air filter was $4 and the plug might have been $6. This is like it's like a copper series or something. It's supposed to be a little bit better than the standard one. So total, I think it came like $10 or $11 for the two pieces. So we're going to go ahead and get this stuff put back in. Then we're going to reinstall our carburetor, and we're going to see what happens. Alright, we're going to put this carburetor back in now. Hopefully I got this camera set up where you can see this. Your linkage right here, that's the first thing you got to do. You got to get that back on through this hole right here. So you kind of have to finagle this to do that. So hopefully you can see this. Just turn it at whatever angle you have to turn it at. Stick it through the hole and then turn it like that. And try to zoom in on that. And that's basically what you want that to look like. So once your linkage is back on, there we go. Now remember this carburetor, I'm calling it a quick connect. Basically you want to line it up and just push that back in. Alright, now that we got that carburetor seated properly, our next step is going to be to put this back on. I'm going to call this our backing plate. That's your primer. The most important thing for this is this inlet hole right here. You have to make sure that it seats into that tube right there. And when you're taking this off, that's one thing. It's not that hard to do, but getting it back on can be a little bit of a pain. So what I do is I take this top cover off, and that allows us a little more access because it gets this out of our way. I already have these loose, but there's just 3 bolts. 1, 2, 3. Take those out, and then pull this off. And the pull cord will kind of pull on you, so that's fine. Just let it sit there. So now you can see we got a lot more access. So now I can take this, take my inlet tube, and now I can actually get in there with my hands and I can push that in so that seats properly. Okay, now at this point we put our 4 screws back in. Remember, there's 2 8mm head and 2 7mm head. Over to the far left is an 8mm, top right 8mm, 7mm down to the left a little bit, and then the last one is on the bottom. So just go ahead and put them back in and snug them back up. At this point, we can hook up our fuel line. Hopefully that's focusing. Where are you? So just take your fuel line. You still got your clamp pushed over to the right, so just slide that back onto that barb right there, and then just reverse of how you took it off. Obviously, just squeeze the clamp and slide it back over to the left. Like I showed you before, I had this pinched off with a pair of pliers, so I didn't lose the gas, but I had water in the carburetor, so obviously there was water in the gas, so the little bit of gas that was left in there, I wasn't going to take a chance with it, so I emptied it out. So that's why I don't have that pinched off anymore. But if your gas is good, you would still have that pinched off. Obviously, once you get it hooked back up, take those pliers off. Okay, now we're gonna put our new filter in there. That's pretty straightforward. Obviously, line up the hole with your primer bulb and just make sure it's in there good. Before you put this in, if there's any leaves or grass or whatever on the other side of this, obviously get that out of there or it's going to get sucked in. But if you had a filter on there before, you really shouldn't have much in there. But that's it. Do that. And we're going to slide our cover back in. Make sure the 2 teeth are on the bottom. And snaps in. Alright, next we're just going to put our new plug in. That's pretty straightforward. Opposite of the way you took it out. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Once you get your plug hand tight, definitely tighten it with your fingers. Get it as tight as you can with your fingers, then put your wrench back on and just make it snug. Don't go crazy on it or you'll never get it out the next time. And you could also break the porcelain on it. So just snug, and then that's it. Just take your boot, pop that back on. Okay, so we're pretty much back together here. I'm going to put some fresh non-ethanol gasoline in it and see if I can get it started now. The only other thing you might want to do for maintenance, well, that you definitely want to at least check the oil. So this is going to be your dipstick here. Just undo that. Take that out, and if I can get this to focus, make sure that there's oil down. See where those 3 hash lines are. I'm like right on the first line. It could use a tad, so I'll probably top it off a little bit. If you want to change the oil in these less expensive mowers, most of your mowers are going to have some kind of drain plug on the bottom, and this one doesn't appear to have that, which I've ran into before with some of the less expensive mowers. So that don't mean you can't change the oil. Like this one right now, I emptied the gas out, so it'd be a good time to do it. Basically, you take your dipstick out, get yourself a container, and you're going to have to take the mower and tip it upside down and drain out all your oil and then put fresh stuff in. Definitely, if you have your manual for the lawnmower, see how much they recommend putting back in. If not, start with small amounts. They don't take much. Put your dipstick in, make sure you clean it first and see where you're at. If you're not showing on the dipstick yet, put a little more in, and just make sure you don't go past those 3 hash lines. So you can change the oil in these. I'm just going to top it off because I got some mowing to do. So I'm going to put some gas in and see what happens. Alright, so that pretty much wraps it up. It started first pull. Nothing like a nice clean carburetor and a new plug. So yeah, so again, this is a basic video. This is for your homeowner that might not have much for mechanical skills, but for $10 worth of parts and maybe maybe an hour and a half out of your afternoon, it beats paying the local shop $80 to do something as simple as that. So hope it helps someone.